Every day at exactly 4 p.m., my grandmother would sit in her favorite chair by the window, the one with the faded floral cushions and the soft wooden arms polished smooth by time. She would reach for her chipped porcelain teacup, the one she had owned since her wedding day, and begin her ritual. With slow, deliberate movements, she scooped dried herbs into a small pot, poured steaming water over them, and waited. The room would fill with the fragrance of rosemary and mint, a scent so sharp yet comforting that even now, decades later, I can close my eyes and feel as if I'm back in her living room. For us, her grandchildren, it was simply Grandma's tea time, a habit, a family tradition, something we thought was quaint but unremarkable. But looking back, I realize it was never just a cup of tea. It was her quiet way of protecting something far more precious than taste or comfort. It was her way of guarding her memory, her presence, her identity. At the time, we didn't see it. We thought memory loss was just a natural part of aging. Forgetting a name here, a birthday there, wasn't that what everyone's grandmother did? But my grandmother had a secret. She was fighting back, not with pills or doctor's visits, but with leaves steeped in water and 10 sacred minutes of silence. Today, science is beginning to confirm what she somehow knew all along. Certain plants, long dismissed as folk remedies, contain compounds that can protect the brain, sharpen focus, and soothe the nervous system. Neuroscientists talk about antioxidants, flavonoids, and neuroplasticity. But my grandmother never used those words. She simply said, "This calms the mind." And maybe in ways we didn't yet understand. She was right. I often wonder now, was it the herbs themselves that made the difference, or was it the ritual? The act of pausing, breathing, and paying attention to a single small joy every single day. Maybe it was both. Maybe memory is like a garden. It needs water, sunlight, and rest. And my grandmother had unknowingly created her own daily ritual of remembrance. So I want to take you on that journey with me. Through her story, we'll look at the first warning signs of memory decline, the hidden mistakes that speed up forgetfulness, and the surprising ways a simple cup of tea can nurture not just the brain, but the soul. And I'll ask you this. Do you ever find yourself forgetting where you left your keys? Pausing mid-sentence, searching for the right word? Struggling to recall a date, a face, a detail you once knew so easily? If so, maybe this story is also yours. Because what my grandmother showed me, long before scientists wrote about it, is that the path to clarity and presence doesn't have to be complicated. It can begin with something as simple as hot water, a handful of herbs, and the decision to care for yourself. It never happens all at once. Memory doesn't disappear in a single day like a light being switched off. It fades, quietly, like ink dissolving in water. For my grandmother, the first signs were small, so subtle we barely noticed them. At Sunday dinners, she would pause in the middle of telling a story, her hands gesturing in the air as if the missing word was floating there, just out of reach. You know the thing," she would say, her brow furrowed, her voice soft with frustration. Sometimes she'd laugh it off, waving her hand as though it wasn't important. Other times I saw the shadow in her eyes, the silent fear. What if it doesn't come back? At first, we told ourselves it was normal. "Everyone forgets things now and then," my father said, reaching for another slice of bread. "She's just tired." But I remembered the way her lips pressed together after each slip, as if she was holding something fragile inside. The signs grew clearer. Recipes she had made for decades suddenly confused her. She would add salt twice or forget the sugar altogether. One evening, she burned the chicken because she lost track of time, something she had never done before. "It's just age," my aunt whispered, but I could feel in my bones it was something more. She began to confuse days. She would dress up on a Tuesday thinking it was Sunday, waiting by the door for us to arrive. And when we didn't, she sat in silence, clutching her hands, embarrassed by the mistake. It wasn't only about memory. It was about identity. My grandmother had always been the anchor of our family, the one who remembered birthdays, the one who told stories of the old country, the one who could recite recipes without looking at a book. To watch her hesitate, to see her stumble over a name, was like watching the strongest pillar in a house begin to crack. And yet, she rarely admitted her struggle. Pride, perhaps, or the quiet dignity of her generation. But I caught glimpses of it in the little things. The way she wrote notes to herself on scraps of paper, phone numbers, shopping lists, reminders, as if each word was a lifeline. The way she avoided conversations that required too much detail, steering instead towards safe, familiar topics. I'll never forget the afternoon I found her sitting by the kitchen table, staring at an envelope. "I know I should know this address," she whispered almost to herself. "But it's gone." She looked at me then, her eyes wide, a mixture of fear and shame. "Am I disappearing?" she asked. That question hit me like a stone. Am I disappearing? It was then I understood that memory loss isn't just about forgetting names or dates. It's about losing pieces of yourself. And the scariest part? It sneaks in so quietly that by the time you notice, it feels too late. But here's the truth we often ignore. Our brains send us signals long before we hit that breaking point. Small lapses, subtle hesitations, little confusions. These are the whispers of a mind asking for help. Science now tells us what my grandmother instinctively felt. The earliest signs of cognitive decline often show up in language. Words take longer to retrieve. Sentences trail off. Instructions, once simple, become puzzles. The brain is asking for nourishment, for rest, for stimulation. But back then, we didn't know that. We brushed it off, laughed it away, called it senior moments. And because we ignored those signs, her quiet battle went unseen for years. And yet through it all, there was one constant: her tea. Even on the days she misplaced her glasses, even when she repeated a story twice in one evening, at 4 p.m., she would still gather her herbs, pour her water, and sit in silence. Looking back, I believe she sensed something slipping before we did. And maybe, just maybe, that teacup was her way of fighting back. So let me ask you this. Have you noticed moments like these in yourself or someone you love? The lost word, the forgotten date, the misplaced recipe card? Did you shrug it off? Or did you feel that pang of worry deep inside? Because ignoring those whispers of the brain can be the difference between slow decline and gentle protection. My grandmother may not have known the science, but she understood the urgency. And that is why her ritual mattered. Most people believe memory loss is sudden, that it arrives like a thief in the night, stealing names, faces, and details in one cruel swoop. But the truth is, decline begins much earlier, fed not by chance, but by habits we rarely question. For my grandmother, tea was her protection. But for many others, silent mistakes were the real enemy. Let me explain. We live in a world that pushes older adults toward routines of comfort. The same meals, the same television shows, the same quiet afternoons staring at the clock. And while there is nothing wrong with familiarity, repetition without challenge slowly starves the brain. It's like giving the body food but never exercise. The muscles weaken, the mind does too. One of the greatest silent mistakes is living life on autopilot. Waking up, drinking the same coffee, sitting in the same chair, going through motions without fresh input. The brain thrives on novelty. It craves stimulation. When days blur into each other without new experiences, neurons stop building new connections. And without connections, memory falters. Another mistake? Poor sleep. My grandmother used to say, "The night is the brain's laundromat." Only now do I understand what she meant. While we sleep, the brain clears out toxins, organizes memories, and resets for the next day. But when sleep is shallow or broken, the brain doesn't finish its cleaning. Imagine never finishing the laundry. Eventually, the pile becomes too high. That's what happens with unprocessed memories. They slip away. Food plays a role too. In her small kitchen, my grandmother cooked with herbs, vegetables, and simple grains. She rarely touched processed foods, not because she knew the science, but because she believed in real food. Today, we know that diets heavy in sugar, refined carbs, and processed oils inflame the body and the brain. Inflammation is like rust. Slowly, quietly, it erodes pathways, dulls focus, and weakens recall. Then there's stress, the silent companion of old age. Worry about money, about health, about being a burden. Chronic stress floods the brain with cortisol, a hormone that, in small bursts, is useful, but in long waves becomes toxic. Too much cortisol damages the hippocampus, the very part of the brain responsible for memory. My grandmother didn't have the language for this, but she had intuition. That's why she carved out her 4 p.m. ritual. A pause, a way to remind her nervous system, you are safe now. The irony is this. What many older adults dismiss as just aging is often the consequence of these silent mistakes. Poor sleep, inflammatory diets, monotony, and stress. Each one chips away at the brain's resilience. I remember visiting my neighbor, Mr. Williams, who was only a few years older than my grandmother. His home was quiet, almost too quiet. He spent most days in front of the television, eating microwave dinners, rarely stepping outside. He laughed about forgetting his doctor's appointment, about misplacing bills, about losing his train of thought mid-sentence. "It's just old age," he said with a shrug. But I couldn't help noticing the difference. Where my grandmother remained sharp, curious, and emotionally alive, he seemed to be fading faster. And I wondered, was it really just age? Or was it the silent mistakes accumulating day after day? Science now tells us the brain is not doomed to decline the moment we cross 70. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections, continues throughout life, but it requires fuel, rest, and novelty. Without those, decline accelerates. And here lies the quiet brilliance of my grandmother's tea. She didn't only steep herbs, she created a ritual that combined 3 powerful elements: nutrition, herbs with natural compounds that soothed inflammation and nourished neurons; rest, 10 minutes of calm, signaling to her nervous system to release tension; novelty, the daily act of preparing something with care, engaging her senses, her smell, her touch, her taste. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a cure. It was a choice. A series of small, intentional acts that together became a shield. I think back to the evenings when I sat across from her watching her sip her tea. Sometimes she would close her eyes, breathe deeply, and whisper, "This helps me think." At the time, I thought she meant it in a casual way. Now I realize it was her truth. So let me ask you, have you fallen into the trap of routine without challenge? Do you go through days without learning something new, without moving your body, without giving your brain the rest it craves? Because memory isn't just lost with age. It's lost in the silent mistakes we make every single day. And sometimes all it takes to begin healing is noticing those mistakes and replacing them with rituals of care. For my grandmother, that ritual was tea. For you, it may be something else. But whatever it is, it begins with intention. When I was young, I thought my grandmother's tea was nothing more than a cozy tradition, something warm to sip on a cool afternoon, the kind of habit grandmothers cling to. But years later, when I began reading more about the brain, I realized she had been years ahead of her time. Without a single medical degree, without ever opening a research paper, she was practicing what scientists now describe as neuroprotection. And the key I discovered was in the leaves she steeped. Take rosemary, for instance. For centuries, rosemary has been linked with memory. The ancient Greeks wore rosemary garlands during study sessions, believing it sharpened recall. Back then, it was dismissed as folklore. But modern research paints a different story. A study from the University of Northumbria in the UK found that even the aroma of rosemary can enhance memory performance and alertness. Imagine that. Simply breathing in the scent of an herb could awaken parts of the brain. Then there's ginkgo biloba. My grandmother occasionally slipped its dried leaves into her blend. Ginkgo is one of the most studied herbs in relation to brain health. Research shows it increases blood flow to the brain, which can support cognitive function and even slow down the progression of memory decline in older adults. In a way, it feeds the brain what it craves most: oxygen and circulation. She also used sage, a plant that scientists now confirm can improve memory and mood. Studies have shown that certain compounds in sage act on the same pathways as some Alzheimer's medications, boosting neurotransmitters like acetylcholine that are essential for memory retention. My grandmother didn't know the word acetylcholine. She just said, "Sage clears the fog." And then there was her favorite, green tea. Back then I thought green tea was just another drink, a little bitter, a little earthy. But green tea is loaded with catechins, powerful antioxidants that protect brain cells from damage. Some studies suggest it can reduce the risk of cognitive decline and even improve working memory. The caffeine, mild compared to coffee, gave her a gentle lift without the crash. All of these plants, each with their own properties, formed her silent shield. But here's the part that amazes me most. Modern science doesn't only confirm the benefits of these herbs individually, it also shows how rituals around them matter. You see, when you prepare a tea, when you smell it, touch it, taste it slowly, you activate multiple senses at once. And engaging multiple senses is one of the best ways to strengthen neural connections. Think about it. The fragrance of rosemary, the warmth of the cup in your hands, the earthy bitterness on your tongue. Every sip is like a tiny workout for the brain. There's also the element of antioxidants. Our brains, like the rest of our bodies, are under constant attack from oxidative stress, damage caused by free radicals. It's like tiny sparks that slowly burn the wiring of the brain. Over time, oxidative stress contributes to memory decline, confusion, and even neurodegenerative diseases. The herbs in my grandmother's tea were rich in compounds that quenched those sparks, protecting the delicate pathways of her mind. But science also warns us, no single herb, no single cup of tea is a miracle cure. Memory isn't saved by one sip. It's about consistency, the daily act of giving the brain the nourishment it needs. That's why her ritual mattered so much. 10 minutes a day, every day for decades. It wasn't just tea, it was training, it was maintenance. I remember reading a report from Harvard Medical School that said the most powerful interventions for brain health are often the simplest: a balanced diet, regular movement, stress management, and mental stimulation. My grandmother's tea ritual, unknowingly, ticked several of those boxes. It nourished her, calmed her, and engaged her senses. It was in essence her personal prescription, one written not by a doctor but by intuition and tradition. And perhaps that's the lesson for all of us. The wisdom of the past often meets the validation of science in the present. When I think back to those afternoons, I no longer see just an old woman sipping tea. I see a woman practicing a kind of medicine long before science gave it a name. So let me ask you, have you ever underestimated the power of something simple? Brushed off an old family tradition as quaint, without realizing it carried wisdom? Because what science is teaching us now is that memory, clarity, and presence don't always require a prescription bottle. Sometimes they're steeping quietly in a teapot, waiting to be shared. If you asked my grandmother why she drank her tea every afternoon, she would never have answered with science. She wouldn't have spoken about antioxidants, neurotransmitters, or blood circulation. Instead, she would have said something much simpler. It helps me breathe. And maybe that's the part science sometimes forgets. That healing isn't only in the substance but in the act itself. I can still see her now. The way she measured the herbs, never rushing, always careful. The way she closed her eyes as the steam rose, letting the fragrance wash over her. The way she sat in silence, holding the cup in both hands as though she were holding time itself. It wasn't just about what was in the cup. It was about what the ritual meant. The ritual told her body, slow down. The ritual told her mind, pay attention. The ritual told her spirit, you are safe. And every one of those messages is vital for memory. You see, memory doesn't thrive under chaos. It doesn't bloom in a mind that's constantly rushing, distracted, or stressed. Memories are consolidated during moments of calm, when the brain feels safe enough to store them. That's why rest matters, why silence matters, why ritual matters. Scientists today call this mindfulness. They describe it as the practice of being fully present in the moment. But my grandmother didn't use that word. She had never read a meditation book or attended a wellness retreat. And yet, every afternoon, she practiced it with her tea. She was mindful before mindfulness was a trend. The power of ritual is also in its consistency. The brain loves patterns. When something is repeated every day, the brain learns to anticipate it, to prepare for it. At 4 p.m., my grandmother's body already knew it was time to relax, time to focus, time to breathe. The ritual itself became medicine, but there was more. Rituals create meaning. They transform ordinary acts into symbols of care. To her, tea wasn't just hot water and leaves. It was a promise she made to herself. A promise that her mind still mattered, that she was worth protecting. That simple commitment carried emotional weight. And emotions, as science now shows, are deeply tied to memory. I think that's why I still remember those afternoons so vividly. The smell of rosemary, the creak of her chair, the soft light pouring through the curtains. Those weren't just details. They were anchors. Anchors tied to a ritual of presence. Compare that with the way many of us live now. Meals eaten quickly in front of screens. Days filled with noise, distraction, endless scrolling. Our rituals are often ones of hurry, not healing. And in the process, we rob our brains of the very calm they need to preserve memory. My grandmother's ritual was her sanctuary. It was where she met herself again, where she recentered. And perhaps, without realizing it, that's what kept her memories sharper than anyone expected well into her 90s. Because here's the truth. You can drink the healthiest tea in the world, but if you gulp it down while rushing to the next task, you lose half its gift. The plant provides the compounds, yes, but the ritual provides the environment, the soil in which memory can grow. It makes me wonder, what rituals do we keep today? Do we pause long enough to breathe, to taste, to be present? Or do we treat everything, even self-care, as another box to check? For my grandmother, those 10 minutes were sacred. She didn't let the phone interrupt. She didn't rush through it because dinner needed cooking. She sat, she breathed, she drank. And in doing so, she gave her brain a message stronger than any supplement: you are cared for. So maybe the real secret wasn't in the herbs at all. Maybe the secret was in the silence, the slowness, the sacredness of the ritual. Let me ask you, what if you began one small ritual for yourself? 10 minutes a day to pause, to breathe, to taste, to remember. What if that act alone was enough to begin protecting your memory? Because sometimes the medicine isn't only in what we consume, it's in how we consume it. When I was younger, I believed memory lived only in the brain, that it was something locked inside our skull, separate from the rest of the body. But sitting at my grandmother's table, I began to notice something curious. On days when her stomach was upset, she seemed foggier, slower. On days when digestion was smooth, her mind felt lighter, clearer. At the time, I thought it was coincidence. Now I know it was a truth science has only recently begun to emphasize. The gut and the brain are deeply connected. Doctors call it the gut-brain axis. What happens in the digestive system doesn't stay there. It travels upward, affecting mood, memory, and focus. A troubled gut can inflame the body, release stress signals, and send the brain into confusion. A healthy gut, on the other hand, nurtures clarity and calm. My grandmother may not have known the term gut microbiome, but she understood the effect. That's why her teas often included herbs like peppermint, chamomile, and ginger, plants known for soothing digestion. She would smile and say, "If the stomach is calm, the head will follow." And she was right. Peppermint, for example, isn't just a digestive aid. Studies show it can improve alertness and reduce fatigue, indirectly supporting memory. Chamomile, with its gentle calming effect, helps reduce anxiety. And anxiety, as science confirms, interferes with the brain's ability to store and retrieve memories. Ginger, beyond easing nausea, has powerful anti-inflammatory properties that can protect both gut and brain from silent damage. It's a cycle, really. When the gut is inflamed, the brain feels cloudy. When the brain feels cloudy, mood declines. When mood declines, memory suffers. and round it goes. The beauty of my grandmother's ritual was that her tea supported every step of this cycle. It wasn't only for her memory, it was for her mood, her digestion, her entire sense of balance. And the calmer her body felt, the sharper her mind became. I remember one evening when she had been unusually irritable. She snapped at my grandfather for misplacing the salt shaker, then sighed and rubbed her temples. "I don't feel myself today," she admitted softly. After dinner, she made her tea, peppermint and chamomile that time, and I watched the tension slowly leave her shoulders. Her face softened, her laughter returned, and later when she told us a story about her childhood, her words flowed effortlessly without hesitation. It was as if the tea had unlocked her again. Science would explain it differently. The herbs reduced inflammation, soothed her nerves, and calmed her gut, which in turn eased her mind. But to me, it looked like magic. And perhaps the greatest lesson was this: memory isn't isolated. It's not just neurons firing in the dark. It's connected to mood, to digestion, to the way we care for our whole body. Ignore the gut and the mind will suffer. Nourish it, and the mind has room to flourish. Think about how often we treat memory loss as something only the brain can fix. Pills, puzzles, brain games. But how often do we look at what's on the plate, at the stomach that digests our food, at the microbes that whisper to our nerves? My grandmother never separated the two. To her, the body was one story, and her tea was her way of keeping that story in balance. So let me ask you, have you noticed how your mood shifts after a heavy meal? Or how clarity returns after something light and soothing? Have you felt the fog of fatigue after sugar, or the calm that follows a cup of chamomile? These are not coincidences. They are signals. Signals that the gut and the brain are in constant conversation. And the herbs we choose, the foods we eat, the rituals we keep, all of them shape that dialogue. My grandmother lived by instinct, but today science is catching up. Researchers now call the gut the second brain because it communicates directly with the central nervous system. And every sip of her tea, whether peppermint or ginger or chamomile, was like a message to her brain. You are safe, you are balanced, you can remember. That's the cycle. The gut shapes the mood shapes the memory, and the memory, in turn, shapes the life we get to live. And for her, it all began with a cup of tea. My grandmother lived a long life, but what amazed people most wasn't the number of her years. It was the sharpness of her mind. Even at 92, she carried herself with dignity, remembering stories, names, and lessons that many her age had long forgotten. Doctors were puzzled. Friends were in awe. "What's her secret?" they would ask me. And she always gave the same answer, with a sly smile and a little shrug. "It's my tea. It keeps my memories safe." At first I thought she was joking, but now looking back I believe her, because her clarity wasn't just about the herbs in her cup. It was about everything the ritual represented: consistency, presence, nourishment, and love. I remember sitting with her on the porch one autumn afternoon, the air crisp, leaves falling like golden confetti around us. She was 90 years old then, wrapped in a knitted shawl, her teacup steaming in her hands. She began telling me about her childhood in vivid detail: the smell of her mother's bread baking, the sound of roosters in the morning, the feel of bare feet on cool stone floors. Every detail was sharp, alive, textured. I listened, stunned. "How do you remember all this?" I asked. She laughed, a soft, knowing laugh. "Because I never let myself forget. Every day I remind my mind that it still matters. My tea helps me. It slows me down, gives me time to breathe. And when I breathe, my memories come back to me." It wasn't that she never forgot small things. Dates sometimes slipped. She occasionally misplaced her glasses. But the important memories, names of her children, the faces of her grandchildren, the lessons she wanted to pass on, those remained intact. She kept writing letters even when her hands grew shaky. She kept reading, even when her eyes strained. She kept telling stories, even when her voice was weak. And through it all, she kept her ritual. I think the ritual gave her more than clarity. It gave her identity. At a time in life when so many feel themselves fading, she held on to herself with grace. Her tea was her anchor, and with it, she kept from drifting away. The doctors could measure her blood pressure, her cholesterol, her bones, but they couldn't measure the strength of her spirit, or the effect of decades of small, consistent care. And maybe that's the greatest lesson. Longevity isn't just about adding years. It's about preserving presence. It's about staying awake to your own life, even as the seasons change. I'll never forget her last birthday. She was 92. Our family gathered around, candles flickering on the cake, her eyes shining in the dim light. She looked at each of us, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and spoke slowly, clearly. Don't waste your days. Care for your mind. Care for your heart. Life goes fast, but memory keeps it alive. And you can protect it if you choose. Her words stayed with me long after she was gone. And every time I prepare a cup of tea, I hear them again. So perhaps her secret wasn't only the plants she steeped, but the life she lived. A life of small, intentional acts that kept her mind sharp and her spirit unbroken. And in that sense, her tea was more than a drink. It was a philosophy. My grandmother's ritual was her own, born from intuition, tradition, and a little experimentation. But the beauty of rituals is that they can be created, adapted, and shaped to fit anyone's life. You don't have to copy hers exactly. You only have to understand what made it powerful. Intention, consistency, and presence. So how do you create your own memory ritual? It begins with a choice, a simple decision to give your mind 10 minutes each day. Not as an obligation, not as a chore, but as a gift. Step 1. Choose your herbs. Start with 2 or 3 plants known to support clarity and calm. You don't need a complicated blend. For memory, consider rosemary for focus, sage for clarity, or green tea for gentle energy. Add peppermint or chamomile if you want to calm the body and ease digestion. Ginger is wonderful if you seek warmth and circulation. Think of your herbs as allies. Each one brings something unique, a whisper of support for your brain and body. And when you combine them, they create harmony. Step 2. Create the space. Don't just brew tea while rushing through the day. Give it a place in your life. Find a chair by the window, a quiet corner, a space that feels like your own. When you sit there, let it signal to your mind, this is memory time. For my grandmother, it was the chair with the worn floral cushions. For you, it could be a balcony, a porch, or even a small table with a candle. What matters is consistency. Step 3. Breathe with the ritual. When you pour the hot water over the herbs, pause. Watch the steam rise. Inhale the fragrance. Feel the warmth of the cup in your hands. Take your first sip slowly, letting the taste fill your senses. This isn't just drinking tea, it's practicing presence. And presence is where memory begins. Step 4. Anchor the moment. Choose a small act to pair with your tea. Write a short note about your day. Read a page of a book. Look through old photos. Call a loved one. These actions, paired with the ritual, deepen memory by tying it to experience. For example, imagine sipping rosemary tea while writing down 3 things you're grateful for. Over time, your brain begins to associate that taste and that smell with gratitude and recall. You are training your memory, 1 cup at a time. Step 5. Protect the time. Treat these 10 minutes as sacred. No phone, no television, no rushing, just you, your tea, and the gift of stillness. Protecting this space sends a message to your nervous system. This matters. You matter. The key is not perfection, but persistence. My grandmother missed her tea only rarely, even when life was busy. It wasn't about discipline. It was about love. A quiet love for herself and her mind. And maybe that's the final step. Approach the ritual not with pressure, but with kindness. This isn't about fighting age or clinging to youth. It's about honoring the mind you have, nurturing it, giving it the best chance to stay awake and alive. Because here's the truth. Memory rituals don't need to be complicated. They don't need expensive supplements, exotic ingredients, or elaborate routines. They only need intention. When you sip slowly, breathe deeply, and give your brain the calm it craves, you're doing more than protecting memory. You're teaching yourself to live in the present. And isn't that what memory is all about? Living today in such a way that tomorrow has something worth remembering. So let me ask you, what would your ritual look like? What herbs would you choose? Where would you sit? What small act could you pair with it? Don't wait for memory to slip before you begin. Start now, because the truth is, clarity isn't just preserved by science, it's preserved by choice. And your ritual, as simple as a cup of tea, could become your promise to yourself. I will remember. I will stay present. I will care for my mind. When I look back at my grandmother's life, what strikes me most isn't just her longevity. It's the way she lived those years. Many people grow old. Fewer remain truly alive within their own stories. Her tea ritual didn't turn her into a superhero. She wasn't immune to pain or loss or the natural slowing of the body. But what it gave her was something more precious, the gift of presence, the ability to remain herself, fully, until the very end. I remember the long walks she took with me in the park, even in her 80s. She walked slowly, leaning on her cane, but her eyes were bright, her words sharp. She'd point out the birds, recall their names, and tell me stories about how she and her sisters used to gather herbs in the fields back home. While her body moved carefully, her mind danced. She still read books late into the night, squinting through glasses but devouring the pages. She wrote letters in her shaky handwriting, never missing a chance to send love through words. She played card games with her grandchildren and laughed when she lost. And perhaps most importantly, she still remembered us. She knew our names, our stories, our struggles. She wasn't just physically present, she was emotionally connected. Even in her 90s, she could look at me with eyes full of recognition, love, and wisdom. That, I believe, was the greatest result of all. Her family noticed. "Mom, you're sharper than me," my father would joke when she corrected him about a detail. "Grandma, how do you still remember all this?" my cousins asked, and she would simply smile and lift her cup. Because I never stopped caring for my mind. It wasn't just the herbs that preserved her memory. It was the entire philosophy behind the ritual. Small, consistent choices made every single day. Choices that told her nervous system, you are safe. Choices that nourished her gut, lifted her mood, and calmed her stress. Choices that kept her engaged with life instead of retreating from it. Science now calls this a protective lifestyle. But to her, it was just living with intention. The transformation was visible not only in her sharpness but in her spirit. She wasn't afraid of aging. In fact, she embraced it. "Every wrinkle is a story," she used to say, tracing the lines on her face with her finger. But the mind keeps the stories alive. That's the long-term gift of rituals like hers. They don't erase aging. They don't promise miracles. What they give you is dignity, autonomy, connection. They let you keep writing your story even as the pages grow older. And isn't that what we all want? Not just to live long, but to live well. To walk in the park, to read a book, to laugh with our grandchildren, to remember the names and the faces that make life meaningful. Her life showed me it's possible. Because in the end, it wasn't the tea that mattered most. It was what the tea allowed her to do. It gave her the clarity to keep being herself. A mother, a grandmother, a storyteller, a woman who carried dignity into every year of her life. I often think about this when I see others her age who faded much sooner, who surrendered to the fog. The difference wasn't luck. It wasn't even genetics. It was daily choices. Small, almost invisible acts that added up to decades of presence. And so, every time I prepare tea now, I remind myself, this is more than a drink. This is a seed for long-term clarity, for presence, for memory. And if nurtured, it can blossom into a life fully lived. So let me ask you, What transformation do you want for your later years? Do you want to fade quietly, or do you want to remain alive in your own story? Because the choice begins now, with one ritual, one cup, one decision to care. And over time, those small acts might just give you the same gift they gave my grandmother. A long life, lived with a mind that never stopped shining. When I think of my grandmother now, I don't just remember her face or her voice. I remember the feeling of being with her, the warmth of her presence, the steadiness of her spirit, the comfort of knowing that her mind was still her own, even as her body aged. That was her true gift. Not just the tea, not just the ritual, but the reminder that it is never too late to care for yourself. Because memory isn't only about recalling facts or names. It's about holding on to who you are. It's about staying connected to the people you love, the stories that shaped you, the wisdom you've earned. Without memory, life loses its texture. With it, even the simplest moments become treasures. And here's the truth I learned from her. You don't need complicated solutions to protect your mind. You don't need expensive pills or miracle cures. What you need is consistency, intention, a daily promise to give your brain the nourishment and the rest it deserves. For her, it was tea. For you, it might also be tea, or perhaps something else. Maybe it's a daily walk. Maybe it's a moment of silence. Maybe it's the choice to eat foods that bring life instead of fatigue. Whatever it is, the principle is the same. Small choices, repeated every day, create transformation. So let me ask you directly, have you noticed your memory slipping? The hesitation when you try to recall a word? The pause when a date escapes you? Have you brushed it off as just aging? If so, please hear this. It is not too late. You can take steps now to protect your mind. You can create rituals that bring clarity, peace, and strength. You can slow down the fog and invite back the light. Don't resign yourself to decline. Don't let the silence steal what matters most. My grandmother's story isn't just her story, it's an invitation. An invitation for you to begin your own journey of care. So I ask you, what ritual could you begin today? What simple act could you protect day after day to keep your mind awake? And what memory, what person, what story, what piece of yourself is worth protecting? If this story touched you, share it with someone you love. Maybe it's your sister, your father, your neighbor, someone who has whispered, "I feel like I'm forgetting." Remind them, there is still hope. And I'd love to hear from you too. Have you tried a natural remedy that supported your memory? Do you have your own ritual, a tea, a walk, a prayer that helps you feel present? Tell me in the comments. Your story might be the encouragement someone else needs. Because at the end of the day, this isn't only about memory. It's about presence. It's about refusing to fade away. It's about living every year, every moment with dignity and awareness. My grandmother taught me that. And now I pass it on to you. Take the cup, begin the ritual, protect your mind. It's never too late to remember who you are.